Black woman asked to prove she can afford her ticket, then she buys out the airline. I always believed that ordinary moments could unravel into extraordinary events, but nothing prepared me for the day I witnessed Tony Evans boarding her flight at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Her radiant smile and poised stride hid no clue about the storm about to begin. Surrounded by whispers and skeptical stares, Tony became the center of a confrontation that no one expected. A confrontation fueled by subtle prejudice, bold disbelief, and surprising resilience. As the tension rose, I saw the spark in Tony's eyes ignite into a flame, igniting a tale that would change everything, both for her and the airline. Tony Evans was a woman who wore her confidence like a crown. She grew up in a modest neighborhood in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the granddaughter of a local civil rights activist who had taught her to never let society's limits become her own. Despite facing adversity from an early age, Tony excelled in school, graduated with honors from Spelman College, and then hustled her way into the world of finance. By age 28, she was already a rising star in her field, eyeing a directorial position at a major investment firm. Opportunity often arrived, dressed in challenge, and Tony was no stranger to either. She had grown comfortable pushing against boundaries, resisting the easy route when her gut told her the difficult path would yield something far greater. So when a job opportunity arose in the bustling financial scene of Atlanta, she seized it with characteristic gusto. She was used to the raised eyebrows that came her way, perhaps due to her youth, her gender, or her identity as a black woman in a predominantly white male industry. Each skeptical gaze only fueled her drive. Tony had arrived in Atlanta determined to prove her mettle, but more importantly, to prove that corporate ladders had rungs meant for everyone willing to climb. She was soon spearheading big projects, her intuition and sharp analytical mind earning her a reputation for business acumen. Conversations buzzed about her in hushed tones across the top floors of her sleek new office tower. Younger employees of color looked to her as an icon of determination, while some established executives, intimidated by her quick rise, viewed her success with guarded wariness. But what set Tony apart wasn't just her flair for numbers and solid negotiation skills, it was also her heart. She carried her grandmother's legacy like an ember of hope, determined to use her success to spark change for others. Alongside her corporate ascendance, she devoted weekends to coaching young black girls in entrepreneurship and hosted free financial literacy workshops in underserved communities. Even so, life has a way of testing the best of us at unexpected moments. Tony's biggest test came on a sultry summer morning at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the busiest airport in the world. She was there for a trip that was both business and personal, on a Delta Airlines flight bound for Los Angeles. The plan was to finalize a significant merger deal and catch up with her best friend from college who had recently moved to California. Tony had no inkling that one trivial request from a gate agent would snowball into an unprecedented turn of events, one that would change her life forever. That morning, Tony arrived at the airport in her usual style, early, organized, and collected. She strolled through the terminal dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit, a tailored navy blue blazer paired with crisp white slacks. A silver Spelman College pin gleamed on her lapel. Her black carry-on purse, which discreetly carried her laptop, files, and personal belongings, hung casually from her shoulder. She passed through security with ease, greeting the TSA agents politely, well aware of the stress they endured from thousands of travelers every day. At the gate, she found a seat near a large window overlooking rows of planes being methodically prepared for departure. Her phone hummed with incoming messages, work emails, texts from friends, an alert from her investment portfolio app. Excited for a brief respite on the flight, she planned to catch up on reading a novel she'd been eyeing for weeks. Moments before boarding began, Tony noticed a commotion near the gate's desk. A middle-aged woman, wearing a Delta Airlines badge, seemed to be engaged in a tense conversation with another passenger. The passenger, a tall black man in sweats and sneakers, looked visibly upset. Tony couldn't hear everything, but fragments of phrases reached her ears. "Sir, this is a policy, and I'm not sure you can afford." The man threw up his hands, shaking his head in disbelief, and moved away. The gate agent stiffened her posture and scanned the area for the next passenger. Tony frowned. She could sense some friction in the air, but the boarding announcement soon interrupted her thoughts. Being in first class, she was among the first group to approach the gate. She stood up, retrieved her boarding pass from her purse, and joined the short queue. It would be a nearly 5-hour flight, but she was prepared with a good book, noise-cancelling headphones, and enough mental space to plan out the crucial meeting in LA. When it was her turn at the counter, Tony handed over her boarding pass and smiled. The gate agent, whose name tag read C. Reynolds, took Tony's ticket and carefully studied the seat assignment. The agent's lips pursed in hesitation. Then she gave Tony a once-over, her gaze lingering on Tony's hair, neatly braided into a stylish updo, and her face, which bore no makeup aside from a subtle lip gloss. "This is a first-class seat," the agent said, voice tight with an edge of skepticism. "Are you sure this ticket is yours?" Tony's pulse quickened. She nodded politely. "Yes, it certainly is. Here's my ID if you need it." She slid her driver's license forward, trying to keep her tone even. She was used to microaggressions, those subtle, insulting digs that questioned her legitimacy, but she never grew numb to them. The agent glanced at the license and then eyed Tony's blazer. "Do you have a company ID or a corporate business card that could verify your employment status?" she pressed. "We have had instances of fraud." Tony froze for a second, disbelief burning in her stomach. She forced a measured response. "I'm traveling for both personal and business reasons, but how is my job status relevant to a ticket I purchased?" A tension-filled silence hovered. Behind Tony, a few more first-class passengers looked on, their brows furrowed. The gate agent inhaled, set her shoulders, and leaned in conspiratorially. "We've had problems with people booking tickets they can't actually pay for. Company policies, you understand." The hair on Tony's neck stood on end. She had read about these stories in the news, typically shared on social media by outraged customers. Unnecessary proof of payment demanded from black travelers, while white travelers breezed through with minimal scrutiny. She glanced at the wide-eyed onlookers. She felt her throat tighten, but refused to succumb to the wave of anger rising inside. Carefully modulating her tone, she answered, "I purchased this ticket with my personal card. There's no issue with my payment." Her voice rang clear, but inside she seethed at the blatant discrimination. She was well aware that no such scrutiny had been placed on the man ahead of her, who wore an expensive tailored suit, nor on the white couple exchanging laughter in the first-class line behind her. The gate agent's request felt personal, pointed, and entirely unnecessary. C. Reynolds tilted her head, unwavering. "Could you show me the credit card used to buy this ticket?" A forced politeness laced her words. Fingers trembling, Tony dug into her purse and presented the card, along with the booking confirmation on her phone. Her heart thudded with humiliation as she tried to keep her head high. The agent spent an inordinate amount of time flipping between the phone screen and the ticket details. "All right," the agent finally said, the clipped tone unchanged. "We'll let you board, but please be aware, we take payment integrity very seriously here at Delta Airlines." Blood hammered in Tony's ears. She knew she was being singled out. She also knew that causing a scene would only feed into negative stereotypes. So she swallowed her frustration, straightened her posture, and walked into the jetway, feeling the weight of every passenger's gaze on her back. Once inside the plane, Tony found her seat in the front cabin. She placed her bag in the overhead bin and settled in, her face reflecting a storm of emotions. Other first-class passengers busied themselves with storing luggage and adjusting seatbelts, some sneaking curious glances at her. Tony forced a smile at the flight attendant, who offered her a pre-departure beverage. She politely asked for water, needing a moment to clear her head. Seated next to her was a middle-aged woman clad in designer apparel, likely traveling for a lavish vacation or important business dealings. The woman's eyes flickered with mild interest, as though trying to decide if Tony was a celebrity or someone noteworthy. Tony stared straight ahead, focusing on her breath. She considered that maybe she should have spoken up more assertively at the gate, but the truth was she had been caught off guard, forced into a position of having to prove her worth. That pattern was far too familiar. Prove she belonged, prove she was qualified, prove she wasn't an anomaly. Yet there was a special sting when it came from gate agents, flight crews, or restaurant hosts, service professionals, who seemed to decide she was suspicious the moment they saw her skin tone and the trappings of success that supposedly didn't match. Her grandmother's stories of the segregated South and the daily battles for dignity echoed in Tony's mind. The plane gradually filled with passengers. Tony heard the commotion behind her, and from the corner of her eye, she spotted the same gate agent entering the cabin to speak with the flight attendant. They conversed quietly, glancing in Tony's direction. She pretended not to notice, focusing instead on her phone. Yet the sense of being watched was unmistakable, as though her entire existence required validation. Within minutes, the flight attendant performed the standard safety protocols. Tony was relieved to see that the gate agent left the plane, though not without one more lingering stare. The cabin lights dimmed, and the aircraft taxied onto the runway. Tony exhaled, thinking perhaps this ordeal would fade away like a bad dream once she was in the air. Little did she know, the turbulence in her life was just beginning. The flight took off smoothly, the seatbelt sign illuminating the forward cabin with a soft glow. Tony gazed out the window at the receding cityscape below, trying to ground herself in the moment. She had made a pact with herself years ago. She would never let these indignities distract her from her larger goals. But the morning's events had rattled her more than she liked to admit. A few minutes after reaching cruising altitude, the flight attendant reappeared to offer drinks and snacks. Tony noticed how the attendant's demeanor shifted when she approached her row. She wasn't openly hostile, but there was an edge, a slight stiffness in her smile, a cursory glance that seemed calculating. "Would you like a beverage or snack, ma'am?" The flight attendant asked Tony, voice polite but distant. Tony forced a gracious smile. "Yes, just water, please, and maybe the fruit and cheese plate if you have it." The flight attendant nodded wordlessly, retreated, and then returned with a neatly arranged tray. Tony thanked her quietly and tried to sink into the comfort of first class. She slid her headphones on, hoping music would calm her nerves. Next, she opened her laptop, intending to review the contract details for her upcoming business meeting in Los Angeles. 2 rows behind her, a confrontation erupted. A passenger was loudly complaining about an apparent baggage issue or a seating mix-up. Tony tensed as she recognized the same gate agent's voice from the walkway. It seemed the woman had boarded the flight once again, discussing something with a different passenger. The flight attendant was trying to de-escalate the situation, but the argument grew louder, prompting more stares. What happened next defied logic. Tony heard the gate agent mention something about random seat checks in first class. As soon as Tony's seat number was called out, her stomach twisted into a knot. The agent marched forward, accompanied by the flight attendant. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the agent began, her voice echoing in the cabin. "We're conducting a random verification of seat assignments. Could I see your boarding pass once more? A hush fell over the nearby rows. Tony felt the heat of every gaze turn to her. She calmly opened the digital copy of her boarding pass. "Is there a problem with my seat?" she asked, her heart pounding. She'd already shown her ID, her credit card, her ticket. "Now we're just making sure everything's in order, Miss Evans, correct?" The gate agent's eyes flickered to Tony's name on the pass, then scanned the seat. "It is," Tony confirmed. "I already clarified this at the gate." Ignoring Tony's remark, the agent extended a handheld scanner and beeped Tony's ticket. The flight attendant, who looked decidedly uncomfortable, stood to the side, arms folded. After an interminable moment, the scanner beeped green, confirming Tony's valid seat. "All right," the agent said. "We apologize for the inconvenience." Inconvenience, Tony thought. She could almost taste the tension in the air. Some passengers looked away, unwilling to engage. Others watched with curiosity, waiting to see how Tony would react. Part of her wanted to demand answers, to name the discrimination aloud. But an invisible force, a lifetime of navigating such moments, restrained her. She simply nodded, carefully returning her phone to her lap, her face a mask of composure. Yet beneath her calm exterior, her spirit boiled. She remembered her grandmother's advice. "You can't fight every battle head-on, but the battle that picks you. You better be ready to stand your ground." This was that battle, she sensed. Something told her it was far from over. Word of the encounter spread quickly through the cabin. First class was a small sphere of privilege, and any drama there often piqued everyone's interest. A few curious passengers struck up conversations amongst themselves. Some were sympathetic, expressing quiet indignation at what they viewed as blatant discrimination. Others simply shrugged, refusing to get involved. The older woman sitting next to Tony leaned over, her voice hushed with concern. "Dear, are you all right?" she asked gently. "It's quite strange what's happening. They didn't ask anyone else for all that proof." Tony pressed her lips into a thin smile. "I'm fine, thanks. Just trying to get through this flight." She hesitated before adding, "I'm not the only one they questioned, though. I saw them question another black passenger at the gate." The woman's eyes showed a flicker of understanding. She reached out and patted Tony's hand. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this. It isn't right." The simple gesture of empathy loosened the knot in Tony's chest a bit. "Thank you," she whispered. A few rows ahead, a man in a sleek business suit turned around and gave Tony a discreet nod, his expression clearly communicating solidarity. Tony appreciated the small show of support, though it was overshadowed by the humiliation still churning inside her. She put her headphones back on and tried to refocus on her laptop screen, but her mind couldn't settle. Beyond the immediate embarrassment, Tony began considering the potential implications. If this was a routine way to treat certain customers, how many other people had silently endured these small acts of aggression? How many had their travel plans derailed because they felt too powerless to argue? Her grandmother's words resonated more fiercely than ever. "Fight for those who come after you, so they won't have to face the same struggle." She made a quiet resolve. Then and there, she would not let this go. This wasn't just about her seat on the plane. It was about every person who had been marginalized or treated as though they didn't belong. One way or another, she was going to see this through. As the plane cruised toward Los Angeles, Tony's thoughts churned. She replayed every humiliating moment, the gate agent's demands, the second random check, and the quiet stares from fellow passengers. Even the brief turbulence felt like a mirror of her own unsettled emotions. She tried reading her work documents, but found herself rereading the same lines. Instead, she closed her eyes and pictured her grandmother's determined gaze, reminding her why she refused to stay silent. By the time the plane steadied and the seatbelt sign blinked off, Tony had resolved to act not just for herself, but for anyone who had been unfairly cornered by hidden biases. Touching down at LAX brought a momentary sigh of relief. However, when Tony retrieved her phone, her inbox flashed an email from Delta's customer service. It offered only a dismissive denial of any discriminatory practice and a meager travel voucher. Anger flickered through her. This wasn't an apology, let alone an admission of wrongdoing. Yet a deeper determination took root. She collected her luggage and stepped into the California sunshine, resolving that if Delta chose to shrug off her experience, she would push them to confront it. That night, Tony met her old friend Jade at a lively restaurant in Koreatown. Between sizzling dishes and the buzz of conversation, she recounted the ordeal, describing the gate agent's suspicion and Delta's hollow response. Jade listened, eyes flashing with empathy and frustration. "You need to do something," she urged. Tony nodded, already formulating a plan to contact an attorney and demand real accountability. For a brief moment, they let the energy of the night wash away the tension, laughing over nostalgic college memories. But beneath the warm glow of friendship, Tony's resolve solidified. She would not let Delta's dismissive attitude stand. The next morning, Tony dressed in her sharpest business suit, a tailored charcoal ensemble that exuded confidence. She arrived at the sleek office building, housing the investment firm she planned to collaborate with. The merger at stake could open doors for her company to expand into international markets. The potential profits were enormous, and Tony wanted her firm to gain an edge in the fiercely competitive industry. As she entered the boardroom, all eyes turned to her. A hush fell. She extended a firm handshake to each executive, meeting every gaze with unwavering composure. The residual annoyance from yesterday's ordeal lit a fire in her belly, fueling her determination. These suits would see her brilliance, not her anger, though she carried that anger like a sword hidden beneath her armor. The meeting began with cordial introductions, formalities that quickly shifted into an in-depth presentation by Tony. Using meticulously prepared slides and data, she outlined the benefits of the merger, anticipating questions before they were even asked. She seamlessly pivoted from market analysis to risk assessment to growth projections. Her voice held the steady cadence of someone who not only knew her stuff, but believed in every syllable. Midway through her presentation, she paused to gauge the room. The executives were scribbling notes, nodding in appreciation. A few whispered among themselves, impressed by Tony's command of the material. When she finished, the room erupted into careful applause. "Well done, miss." "Evans," said the firm's CFO, an older man with graying temples. "Your presentation was very thorough. We'll certainly have more questions, but color me impressed." Tony smiled politely, thrilled by the positive reception. "I'll be happy to address any concerns," she replied, handing out printouts with additional data. Negotiations started in earnest then, with talk of stock options, governance structures, and performance incentives. The synergy felt tangible. By the time they wrapped up, Tony sensed victory in the air. "Let's proceed with the next steps," the CFO declared, exchanging nods with his colleagues. "We'll formalize our proposal within a week, and I look forward to seeing how we can finalize the terms." Tony shook hands all around, grinning inwardly. The magnitude of what she had accomplished was beginning to sink in. Assuming the deal came through, this would be a career-defining moment. She said her goodbyes and left the office feeling buoyant, though the sting of yesterday's discrimination still smoldered underneath. After a celebratory lunch with Jade, Tony returned to her hotel room. She kicked off her heels, relishing the moment to finally breathe. The meeting had gone exceptionally well, and she'd soon be heading back to Atlanta with potential major deals in the pipeline. Yet she couldn't fully bask in that triumph without addressing the festering memory of Delta Airlines. Tony opened her laptop and began drafting an email. She detailed the events at Hartsfield-Jackson, the gate agent's intrusive demands, the mid-flight verification, and the subsequent humiliation. She included the flight number, the approximate time of boarding, and even the agent's name, C. Reynolds, mentioned on her badge. She wrote with precision, ensuring she remained factual, but she also expressed her sense of injustice. When she finished, she attached her boarding pass screenshot and relevant documents, then hit send, directing it to Delta's customer service department. Next, she called Jade. I just sent Delta an email outlining everything. I asked for an explanation and demanded they investigate their staff's conduct. Honestly, I'm not sure if it'll go anywhere. Big companies love to hide behind apologies. Jade's voice buzzed with encouragement. Well, it's a start, and you have the resources to escalate if they try to dismiss you. Don't let them off easy. Tony appreciated her friend's support. She decided to spend the rest of the evening reviewing merger documents and enjoying the city view. Tomorrow, she'd catch an afternoon flight back to Atlanta. Part of her was dreading the possibility of another run-in with suspicious employees, but she told herself one step at a time. She had done what she could for now. The next day, Tony stepped into LAX with a mixture of hope and unease. She had opted for first class again, partially because her company covered the expense and partially to confront the echoes of her last experience head-on. She wondered if the same scenario would repeat, or if her complaint might have already reached someone's ears. Check-in at LAX went smoothly. No one asked intrusive questions about her ability to pay, and the customer service representative seemed genuinely courteous. Tony boarded the Delta flight without incident, exhaling in relief. Perhaps her complaint had had some effect, or maybe it was just a different airport and staff. Either way, the flight back to Atlanta was mercifully uneventful. However, as fate would have it, Tony's return to her apartment was met with an unexpected email from Delta's customer relations. She read it on her phone while the taxi navigated through traffic. The text made her brow furrow. "Dear Miss Evans, we take every customer concern seriously. After reviewing your account and our gate records, we see no evidence of discrimination. Our staff followed established procedures to ensure payment integrity. However, in the spirit of good customer relations, we'd like to offer you a $200 travel voucher. We hope this resolves the matter. Sincerely, Delta Customer Care." Tony's eyes skimmed the words again, disbelief thickening in her throat. A $200 voucher, a token apology without any accountability or recognition of wrongdoing. The email's insinuation that no discrimination had taken place was a slap in the face. She felt her anger crystallize into resolve. This was not over. The next morning, Tony woke up in her own bed, the email fresh in her mind. She had hardly slept. The clock read 5 a.m., but she knew she wouldn't find rest without taking action. She got up, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and opened her laptop to scour her professional network for a lawyer specializing in civil rights or discrimination suits. Within an hour, she had connected with a prominent attorney named Danielle Foster, known for high-profile cases against corporations. Tony composed another email, this time detailing her entire experience with Delta, and sent it to Danielle's firm. She added that she was willing to pursue whatever legal avenues were available, especially if it would prompt the airline to change their policies or training to prevent similar incidents in the future. While she awaited a response, Tony went about her usual routine. She prepared for the day, briefed her team at work on the positive outcome of her LA trip, and scheduled follow-up calls with the merger clients. But her mind repeatedly drifted back to the defiant email from Delta. The fire of injustice smoldered, refusing to be extinguished by generic corporate wording and a measly voucher. By midday, her phone rang. It was Danielle Foster herself, sounding composed yet curious. "Miss Evans, I've read your email. This is a disturbing incident. Unfortunately, it's not the first time I've heard a story like this. We should meet to discuss your options." Tony breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you for getting back to me so quickly. Let's set something up." I want this to be more than a personal compensation claim. I want them to address the systemic problem. Danielle agreed. Absolutely. Corporations often ignore complaints until legal pressure forces their hand. Let's make sure your voice is heard. They arranged an in-person meeting for later in the week. Tony felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would not be placated or silenced. If the airline wanted to deny wrongdoing, she would give them a reason to pay attention. In the days leading up to her meeting with Danielle, Tony confided in a close colleague at work, Jasmine, who was also a skilled social media strategist. Over lunch, Tony recounted the airline debacle, her complaint, and Delta's dismissive response. Jasmine's eyes flared with indignation. This is textbook profiling. It's maddening. If you're open to it, we can craft a careful narrative for social media. Sometimes public pressure is more effective than quiet complaints. Tony chewed on her lip, uncertain. I'm a private person. I don't usually share personal conflicts online, especially ones this big. Jasmine placed a hand on Tony's shoulder. I get it, but if you want to affect real change, shining a light on their actions can push them to respond more responsibly. We can control the message. Keep it respectful, but firm. That evening, Tony posted a concise but impactful thread on Twitter. She wrote about her experience without naming the gate agent directly, but tagged Delta Airlines, describing how she was singled out and asked to prove she could afford her seat. She mentioned how Delta had dismissed her complaint. She ended by stating she was considering legal action to ensure this wouldn't keep happening to other black travelers. She hit post and watched the retweets and comments multiply. Within hours, her story spread rapidly. People of various backgrounds chimed in with their own experiences, using hashtags like hashtag flying while black, Delta discrimination, and hashtag travel while black. Some demanded an apology from Delta, while others shared stories of solidarity. Tony felt a swirl of emotions, vulnerability at revealing her struggle to the world, trepidation about the airline's reaction, but also a sense of relief that she wasn't alone. Messages of support poured in, as well as heated debates about systematic inequality. The genie was out of the bottle now. Within 2 days, media outlets picked up on Tony's tweet storm. A local Atlanta news station reached out for an interview. National publications began contacting her for a statement. The attention was startling, and it made Tony a bit uneasy. But she recognized the momentum was necessary. This was no longer a singular complaint. It had become a broader conversation about airlines and implicit bias. Meanwhile, Delta's social media team posted a generic response, stating their commitment to diversity and inclusion, and that they took Tony's complaint very seriously. Yet, behind the scenes, Tony learned from sources that the airline was quietly investigating her background, looking for any angle to invalidate her claims. A friend who worked at Delta's corporate office leaked that certain executives were furious that she had gone public. One morning, Tony received a call from a Delta representative offering a more substantial settlement. They promised upgrades for future flights, lounge access, and a higher value voucher if she would retract her public statements. She refused, calmly but firmly stating that her goal was not to score freebies, but to see policy change and hold the offending employees accountable. The representative tried to dissuade her from any further public discourse, hinting that going to the media could harm professional relationships and cost her valuable time and energy. Tony refused again. She was done being silenced, done with hush-money tactics. The day of Tony's meeting with attorney Danielle Foster arrived. Stepping into Danielle's chic downtown office, Tony was struck by the floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist decor. The space exuded power and success. Danielle greeted her with a warm handshake, guiding her to a conference room furnished with sleek chairs and a large table scattered with documents. "Miss Evans, pleased to meet you in person," Danielle said, motioning for Tony to sit. I've gathered some research on airline discrimination cases. Let's talk strategy. Over the next few hours, they dissected every detail of Tony's ordeal. Danielle took copious notes, occasionally nodding or frowning. She explained that while proving explicit discrimination in court could be challenging, that a pattern of incidents both with Tony and similar cases could bolster the argument that Delta's staff was inadequately trained on racial bias protocols. They could potentially pursue a lawsuit that claimed both discrimination and emotional distress, aiming for a settlement or a court ruling compelling Delta to revise its policies. I've also been in touch with a few other passengers who came forward after reading your story, Danielle added. We might consider a class action approach if there's enough evidence of a broader pattern. Tony's heart pounded. She hadn't expected the situation to escalate so quickly, but hearing that others had similar experiences validated her anger. I'm open to whatever approach will create genuine accountability, she said quietly. Danielle nodded. I believe in your cause. Sometimes large companies only pay attention when faced with legal consequences. Let me draft a formal complaint and see if Delta is open to negotiations that include serious policy changes. If they resist, we'll take it to court. They shook hands, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Tony left the office feeling a mixture of apprehension and empowerment. She might be stepping into a long, grueling battle, but she wasn't alone. Tony's Twitter thread ignited a firestorm. Supporters shared their own airline discrimination stories, using hashtags like #FlyingWhileBlack. Delta remained guarded, issuing a vague statement about values and policy compliance. Behind the scenes, Tony faced a surge of hate mail, some attacking her credibility, others laced with overt racism. Still, she pressed on. When Delta's legal team offered a settlement that required her silence, she refused. Instead, bolstered by Danielle's counsel, Tony ramped up her media presence, determined to force change rather than hush money. New testimonies flooded in, passengers, mostly people of color, recounting similar payment verification demands. Journalists unearthed at least 5 official complaints buried in Delta's records. A father who missed his connecting flight with his children came forward, describing near-identical treatment. Public outrage grew, and Delta's stock began to wobble under scrutiny. Sensing the storm, the airline's board quietly launched an internal investigation, discovering that multiple gate agents habitually flagged certain travelers. Each new allegation strengthened Tony's resolve and pushed Delta deeper into a corner, setting the stage for a high-stakes showdown. Tensions escalated to a critical point when Danielle and Tony received an unexpected invitation to Delta's corporate headquarters in Atlanta. The email, penned by a senior vice president, suggested a sit-down meeting to discuss potential resolution. Tony hesitated. Part of her wondered if this was another ploy to buy her silence. But Danielle advised meeting them face-to-face might open the door to a more meaningful outcome. The following week, they arrived at Delta's towering office building, passing through security with visitor badges pinned to their jackets. They were ushered into a gleaming conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows. Seated at the table were several high-ranking executives, including the airline's general counsel, a PR director, and 2 vice presidents. Tony and Danielle exchanged measured greetings with the group, then took their seats. The mood was tense, the conversation civil but frosty. A marketing VP launched into a prepared statement about Delta's commitment to fairness and how they deeply regretted any negative experiences. Then the general counsel spoke, offering a settlement figure significantly higher than anything previously mentioned, on condition that Tony withdraw her lawsuit and sign a non-disclosure agreement. Danielle's eyes narrowed. My client is not just looking for personal compensation, she stated evenly. We require a binding agreement that addresses the systemic issues, enhanced training for staff, a clear policy against racial profiling, and accountability measures. We also want an apology that acknowledges wrongdoing, not merely a regret for any negative experience. One of the vice presidents frowned. We are willing to invest in additional diversity and inclusion training, yes, but we cannot admit to wrongdoing. It sets a dangerous precedent and opens the floodgates for lawsuits. Tony inhaled deeply, her anger simmering. I'm not here to bankrupt you. I'm here because you humiliated me, and apparently many others, based on assumptions about what a black traveler can afford. I want that to change. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. The tension in the room thickened as Danielle presented the evidence they had gathered: formal complaints, sworn affidavits, and social media testimonies from passengers who had undergone similar ordeals. The general counsel's face paled slightly as Danielle's stack of documents kept growing. Silence cloaked the room for a moment. Finally, the PR director spoke with measured politeness. We appreciate your candor. Let's take a short break to confer privately. While the executives stepped out, Tony and Danielle stayed behind, strategizing quietly. They're feeling the heat, Danielle whispered, but they might still try to wriggle out of any public admission of guilt. Tony rubbed her forehead. I want them to do more than lip service. I'm sick of companies issuing statements but never fixing the real problem. After about 15 minutes, the executives returned. The atmosphere remained charged, but the general counsel's demeanor softened. We understand your concerns, she said carefully. What if we propose a multi-year initiative aimed at eradicating discrimination within our airline? We can allocate a significant budget towards staff training, new protocols for checking payment issues, and an oversight committee that includes external civil rights experts. We'll also establish a fund to compensate passengers who've been wronged. Tony glanced at Danielle, who nodded with cautious optimism. This was progress. The marketing VP chimed in. In addition, we're willing to collaborate on public events or campaigns highlighting our renewed commitment to inclusivity. We believe we can turn this negative press into a teachable moment for the entire industry. Despite the seemingly constructive proposal, Tony couldn't forget the belittling experiences she and others had endured. That all sounds good, but how do we ensure you actually follow through? Words are cheap. A flicker of frustration crossed a few faces, but the general counsel responded calmly. We can put it in writing as a binding settlement agreement, enforceable by law. Danielle sat up straighter. That's more like it. We'd also like a formal apology, not just to Miss Evans, but to all passengers who've been subjected to such treatment. The executives exchanged glances again. The PR director quietly nodded. We can work something out, certainly. Our brand is on the line here, and we sincerely want to rectify the situation. It seemed a genuine willingness to rectify had taken hold, or at least self-preservation had spurred them to do the right thing. Tony felt an odd mixture of relief and continued skepticism. But as the meeting drew to a close, she recognized this could be a major victory, not just for her, but for countless others who had faced discrimination in silence. Just as they seemed on the brink of finalizing an agreement, an astonishing rumor reached Tony's ears. Multiple financial news outlets began reporting that a major airline was looking to acquire a significant stake in Delta. The rumor mill identified potential bidders, some foreign, some domestic. The stories were vague, but the possibility of a large-scale buyout or merger loomed. Initially, Tony brushed off the speculation. But as her professional circles buzzed with the gossip, she realized something bigger might be unfolding. A contact in investment banking hinted that Delta's leadership was worried about a hostile takeover. their brand tarnished by the discrimination scandal, their stock price dipping. They were vulnerable in a corporate world where deals could be as ruthless as any battlefield. A few days after the meeting at Delta's headquarters, Tony received a call from an influential friend in finance, Devin Caldwell. He asked if she'd heard the rumors. Tony admitted she had, but she was too preoccupied with the anti-discrimination settlement to pay them much mind. Devin laughed, his voice crackling with excitement. "You might want to pay attention. I heard from reliable sources that the board is freaking out, and they're considering a range of desperate measures. They don't want to be swallowed up by a competitor." "What does that have to do with me?" Tony asked, perplexed. "You're a rising star in the finance world," Devin replied. "Your name holds weight, especially after all the media coverage. I'm hearing whispers in the investor community about a radical plan, one that would involve a group of minority investors stepping in, maybe even you, to buy a controlling interest in Delta. This situation is crazy, but it could be a historical shift." Tony nearly dropped her phone. "Are you joking? That's beyond anything I've ever imagined." "Not joking," Devin reassured. "If they're open to a massive equity infusion to stave off a takeover, you and others could negotiate terms that align with your vision of fairness and equality. It's a long shot, but the conversation is happening." Stunned, Tony thanked Devin and ended the call. Her heart thundered in her chest. Could she, a black woman who had just been humiliated by Delta's staff, become an investor or even a major stakeholder in the same airline? The notion seemed surreal, almost too poetic. But the idea flickered in her mind, taking root. It was the ultimate twist, a chance to reshape the corporate culture from the inside. Tony spent sleepless nights pondering the rumor. If indeed Delta was looking for an investor lifeline, she had the network to pull together a consortium of socially conscious investors, people who believed that profitable business and social responsibility could coexist. She dialed up respected colleagues and mentors, testing the waters. Most were intrigued. A few were downright ecstatic at the prospect of turning the tables on a giant corporation. Meanwhile, Danielle finalized the anti-discrimination settlement with Delta's legal team, ensuring a robust compliance framework would be established. Tony was set to receive a formal apology, along with a commitment to sweeping reforms. The public announcement was scheduled for the following week. However, Tony kept the buyout rumor close to the vest. She didn't want to jeopardize the existing negotiations or appear to hold Delta hostage for more leverage. The trickiest part was that no official buyout negotiations had started. This was all swirling rumor, albeit strong rumor. If she charged in prematurely, she could be laughed out of the room. But if the rumor was correct, Delta's vulnerable board might be receptive to an offer from a coalition of minority-led investors, especially if it appealed to public good and brand rehabilitation. Tony called Danielle. "Hypothetically, if a group of us wanted to buy a stake in Delta, would that complicate the settlement?" Danielle paused. "In theory, no. The settlement is separate. It addresses their past wrongdoing. But if you become an investor, you'll hold significant influence over their future policies, which could be a powerful combination." "Of course, it's an enormous financial endeavor." Tony laughed nervously. "That's an understatement. But I have powerful friends in the investment world, and we might collectively pull this off." With Danielle's cautious blessing, Tony started discreetly assembling a dream team of venture capitalists, philanthropic millionaires, and business executives, many of them people of color who wanted to invest in something more than profit. They wanted to invest in change. Delta's public apology came in the form of a press conference and a written statement posted on their official website. They acknowledged that some of their staff had exhibited behavior inconsistent with our values and reaffirmed their commitment to ensuring every customer is treated with respect and dignity. They also announced a new diversity and inclusion task force, co-chaired by prominent civil rights leaders. The settlement agreement with Tony was not disclosed in detail, but it was clear something significant had happened behind the scenes. Tony watched the press conference from her office. Her phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from friends and family. She exhaled deeply, feeling a measure of closure. Though she remained cautious about Delta's sincerity, the apology was a milestone. Most importantly, it signaled a shift in public and corporate consciousness, a victory not just for her, but for everyone who demanded equality. She and Danielle met that same afternoon, exchanging relieved smiles. "You did it," Danielle said, patting Tony's shoulder. "You forced a corporate giant to admit their wrongdoing and commit to real change." Tony nodded. "It feels good, but we're not finished yet. Now, we push them to follow through." Quietly, she also continued her behind-the-scenes efforts to explore the possible buyout. She wanted to see if she and her allies could take the momentum from this resolution and channel it into something even bigger, real ownership that could shape policies from the top down. A few weeks later, Tony got an unexpected phone call from the newly formed Diversity and Inclusion Task Force at Delta. They wanted her input, maybe even her official participation in shaping the training modules and oversight committees. The idea was to involve someone who had first-hand experience of what went wrong. Tony saw an opportunity. She agreed to meet with them, but she also let slip a hint that she and a group of socially conscious investors had an interest in partnering with Delta at a deeper level. If the airline was serious about changing its culture, having owners who were deeply invested in diversity and equity could be a game changer. To her astonishment, the task force was receptive. They promised to relay her interest up the chain of command. Within days, Tony received a direct call from none other than the CEO's office. They scheduled a meeting to discuss potential strategic partnerships. On the day of the meeting, Tony donned a power suit that reflected her confidence. She arrived at Delta's corporate headquarters, greeted now by a far different atmosphere than her last tense visit. Executives she recognized from the settlement negotiations approached her with polite smiles. The CEO himself, a tall man with graying hair and a genial air, ushered her into his spacious office. Tony explained her vision, a multifaceted partnership that could begin with investing capital into Delta's emerging technology upgrades and green initiatives, and end with seats on the board for minority-led investors, ensuring accountability in diversity efforts. It was audacious, but she presented it with the calm assurance she had honed throughout her career. The CEO stroked his chin, intrigued. "You're proposing something unprecedented, Miss Evans. But in these tumultuous times, unprecedented might be exactly what we need. Let's keep talking." Over the next month, Tony and her consortium of investors negotiated feverishly with Delta's top brass. Board members were split. Some viewed Tony's group as saviors who could fortify the company's finances and public image. Others feared ceding too much control, worried about stockholder backlash from introducing what they called social activism into corporate governance. Throughout the negotiations, Tony had moments of self-doubt. She was a savvy investor, yes, but orchestrating such a massive deal was daunting. She found herself leaning heavily on her allies, veterans of Wall Street, philanthropic tech moguls, and old money donors who wanted to be on the right side of history. Occasionally, she thought back to that humiliating day at Hartsfield-Jackson, amazed at how life had spun her from victim to potential part owner of the same airline. Meanwhile, public sentiment was steadily improving for Delta. Their apology and diversity initiatives softened the blow of the scandal. Yet analysts pointed out that if Delta didn't address its financial vulnerabilities, it could remain a prime target for a hostile takeover. That gave Tony and her team leverage, as Delta needed stable, friendly capital. Finally, after countless conference calls, draft proposals, and late-night strategy sessions, a framework began to solidify. Tony's group would invest a substantial amount, acquiring a meaningful stake in Delta. In return, Delta would allocate board seats to this new group, enshrine anti-discrimination measures in corporate bylaws, and commit to transparent reporting on their progress. The final signing was set for a bright morning in late spring. Tony, dressed in a soft ivory suit, arrived with Danielle and her closest business partners. She was greeted by cameras, flashing journalists, eager for a glimpse of this groundbreaking deal. In the same building where she had once sat across from suspicious executives, she now walked in as an equal participant in shaping Delta's future. Inside a polished conference room, the official contract lay waiting. The CEO, the board members, and Tony's consortium all exchanged greetings. There were formalities, short speeches about unity and growth, and a collective air of cautious optimism. When it came time to sign, Tony stepped forward, pen in hand. For a split second, she remembered that humiliating confrontation at the gate. She remembered the humiliating mid-flight random seat check, the humiliating letter dismissing her complaint. That memory melted into a feeling of triumph. She lowered the pen to the page, signing her name in a flowing script. Applause erupted, cameras clicked, and tears pricked Tony's eyes. She blinked them away, maintaining her composed smile. She had just become a key figure in one of the largest airlines in the world, a black woman who had once been asked to prove she could afford her seat, now in a position to ensure no one else had to face that indignity. In the weeks that followed, Tony worked closely with Delta's leadership to roll out sweeping changes. True to her word, she spearheaded a newly formed committee dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion, overseeing everything from recruitment to in-flight procedures. She met weekly with department heads to ensure the new policies were implemented effectively. From gate agent training modules to advanced oversight of disciplinary measures, the transformation was as comprehensive as it was swift. No longer would any passenger be singled out without solid cause. New policies forbade staff from demanding proof of payment based on mere suspicions. Delta's employees underwent rigorous training to recognize and combat implicit bias, including realistic simulations of everyday scenarios. Customer satisfaction ratings began to climb, and the brand started to recover from the scandal. Articles labeled it one of the most dramatic corporate turnarounds in recent memory. Tony, meanwhile, balanced her responsibilities as a part owner with her existing career in finance. She continued to advocate for inclusion beyond just the airline, leveraging her new influence to uplift other minority-owned businesses. Her philanthropic endeavors also blossomed. She funneled a portion of her profits into scholarships and mentorship programs. But karma spared no one who had acted unjustly in Tony's story. Some staff members who had repeatedly shown racist behavior or violated company policies were terminated. Among them was C. Reynolds, the very gate agent who had demanded Tony prove she could afford her seat. During the corporate investigation, multiple passengers came forward, detailing Reynolds' pattern of questioning only black travelers in first class. Reynolds was let go, and though some labeled it scapegoating, Delta insisted the move was consistent with their zero-tolerance policy. In a twist of fate, it emerged that Reynolds had falsified some of her performance metrics, claiming she had prevented ticket fraud more times than actually documented. The attempt to appear vigilant had driven her to pick on innocent passengers. Once uncovered, the airline severed all ties, and Reynolds faced possible legal ramifications for the falsification of official records. As for the mid-flight gate agent cameo, that employee also faced disciplinary measures. Investigators found no legitimate reason for that second random seat check, confirming it was purely driven by biases. The employee received a permanent mark on their record and was demoted from their supervisory role. Meanwhile, those who had tried to discredit Tony, either privately or publicly, found themselves on the wrong side of history. In a particularly satisfying moment, the same law firm that once threatened Tony with a countersuit faced public censure when emails surfaced, revealing internal discussions aimed at smearing her reputation. Their senior partners issued hasty resignations to avoid further humiliation. For Tony, the greatest triumph came when she visited her grandmother's old house in Baton Rouge. She walked the neighborhood streets, recalling stories of segregation, of civil rights marches, of the quiet resilience that ran in her family. She stood on the porch where her grandmother once rocked in a wooden chair, telling Tony that she was destined for more than just survival. She was destined to break barriers. Tony could hardly contain her emotion, knowing she had indeed broken a barrier. She had turned a moment of degradation into a global statement. She had demanded dignity for herself and countless others, then used her business acumen to effect tangible change at one of the nation's largest airlines. As she watched the setting sun cast golden light over the old home, she silently thanked her grandmother. The sacrifice of that earlier generation had cultivated a new generation's power. For Tony, this was only the beginning. She resolved to remain vigilant, ensuring that her seat at the table never numbed her to the struggles of those who still lacked a voice. Months later, Tony was set to fly again from Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, this time for a speaking engagement in New York. Stepping into the familiar terminal, she felt a twinge of déjà vu, but everything was different now. She flashed her new Delta XP pass, the result of her shareholding status and leadership in the diversity committee. As she approached the first-class gate, she noticed how the staff greeted passengers with genuine warmth. The gate agent, a young woman with bright eyes, smiled at Tony. "Good afternoon, Miss Evans. Welcome back. Please let us know if you need anything at all." Tony nodded, smiling back. She realized she was witnessing the fruits of her fight. An airline culture shifted toward inclusion, one that now recognized the dignity of every traveler. Boarding was swift, respectful. No one demanded extra proofs or singled her out. It felt surreal, a personal victory entwined with something far larger. She settled into her seat, gazing around the cabin, remembering a time she had sat in similar comfort, yet felt scrutinized and belittled. Today, she found only ease. As the plane ascended into the skies, Tony allowed herself a moment of reflection on just how far she had come. The same woman, once asked to prove she could afford her ticket, now held a stake in the airline itself. And as the plane soared higher, Tony felt the boundless possibilities of what could happen when an individual refuses to accept injustice, turning pain into purpose and purpose into transformation. When one courageous act lights a spark, an extraordinary journey can follow. Tony Evans' story began with an unsettling demand to prove her worth and ended with her reshaping a corporate giant from the inside out. Through her determination, she confronted the prejudice rooted in everyday routines, proving that no challenge is too great when you refuse to be silenced. By forging alliances, seeking legal recourse, and transforming anger into action, she created a ripple that spread across an entire industry. This is a testament that resilience, backed by integrity and vision, can uproot even the most stubborn prejudices. If you're inspired by Tony's relentless pursuit of justice and success, please like this video, share it with those who need encouragement to stand up for themselves, and subscribe to our channel. Your support ensures more stories like Tony's illuminate the power of unwavering resolve and collective change.